Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Nutrition Radio. If you notice, sometimes I pause there. I almost say Iron Radio. We have Anthony Fleck with us again, and we're going to talk about 4 topics. Before we even do the intros, we'll talk about a food trend, nutritionally complete meal replacements. There's more there than you might think. In number 2, we're talking about nutrition science, calorie restriction. You may have heard how calorie restriction enhances lifespan. So we're going to delve into that topic a little bit. In section 3, we'll talk about weight management tips, a weight gain tip. So sort of the opposite of the restriction thing. And then for our recipe today, we're going to talk about a way to make a stew. I'll just leave it sort of vague at that point. From the introduction, you know that I am Lonnie Lowry. I was a nutrition professor for more than 20 years. It's been almost 25 now. I'm just an adjunct these days. I consult for the food industry and for academia. And Anthony, what about you?
My name is Anthony Fleck. I'm a fitness enthusiast over the last 15 or so years. My educational background was in microbiology, although I don't do anything related to that any longer. I just like to be a consumer of those kinds of topics and that kind of news nowadays.
Right on, educated consumer. Okay, let's start with our first topic, food trends. So what made you think about this meal replacements and nutritional completeness and all that?
Market news, food and fitness trends.
I've been kind of looking at the different offerings out there for a while and trying a few of them. I like to experiment. That's kind of one of the things I like to do. Try different protein powders, different supplements. You know, that we talked about the chips last week. So one that's I've actually incorporated into my pantry is these powdered meal replacement, or they call themselves nutritionally complete meal replacement foods. So a couple examples are Soylent, I think, was one of the first big ones that came out in the last 10 or 15 years now. Huel is another one. You know, Huel, I think, is a play on human fuel, if I remember right.
Okay.
I've seen one called Kachava more recently that kind of bills itself as more of a superfood, super greens, probiotic, prebiotic, adaptogen, etc. They kind of jump on all the different supplement category bandwagons right now. Those are the 3 that come to mind off the top of my head. I know there's others out there. I know you can get products that call themselves meal replacements just at like your local, you know, your GNC or whatever as well. But I think most of those don't also contain the full suite of micronutrients. So that's what kind of sets apart these products that I've mentioned from your typical, you know, mass gainer or meal replacement shake.
MRPs, right? I typically think mostly I think a powder, but sometimes also just like something in a carton, a Tetra Pak, something like that. Is that what we're getting at here mostly, or?
These products all offer those Tetra Paks. You know, the pre-mixed, ready-to-drink shakes. Usually they're shelf-stable. You can get them either on the shelf of, I've even seen them at Target, Walmart, etc., or you can order them online. But they also sell a bulk powder. Comes in either a bag or a tub, just like a protein powder. And you mix up. Usually they bill them in 400 calorie servings at a time. So they kind of split it between, as if you were to have 5 meals a day for a 2,000 calorie diet is how they divide them up.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost reminiscent of weight gainers, right? But without the calorie load. And honestly, I remember back in the day, I don't even know it's still made. There was Heavy Weight Gainer 900. And I love that stuff. It tastes like cake batter, man. But I know a lot of people say their products do, but it does. But of course, weight gainers have, you know, it's kind of hard to find ones that don't have quite a bit of sugar, other stuff like that. But what was curious is they came out with one that was like Heavy Weight Gainer 1200 or 1500, whatever it was. It was like this escalation. And at the time I was looking at it, I can't recall if it was them or similar products, but as they escalated the calories, it was just more scoops. I'm like, there's nothing different about this formula. It's not even
the serving size. Smart.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, that seems a little bit, you know, sketchy.
That name is almost a caricature of exactly what you would call a weight gainer product if you were trying to make a joke about weight gainer products. Heavy Weight Gainer 1200.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, let me throw just the macros for a couple of these your way, and see what you think here. So for Soylent, again, this is out of a 400-calorie serving. They're comprised of 19 grams of fat, 42 grams of carbs, 6 of which are fiber, and then 20 grams of protein. That's their standard product.
Okay.
So that's, in my opinion, a pretty decent mix for just an average meal.
100 grams of protein a day then, right, if you do 5 servings.
Now, Huel offers a high-protein version. They call it Huel Black, I think. And so that's similar nutrition, but they cut down the carbs and ramp up the protein. So that one comes in at 18 grams fat, 25 grams carbs, 8 grams of fiber, and 40 for protein. So that's hitting 200 a day if you were to eat that for every meal.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing here, I kind of like, is they do have roughly 20% daily value of all of your micronutrients. Go down the list of all the vitamins and minerals that are considered necessary, and they have them, and they dose them out in about a 20% per serving, per 400-calorie serving.
Okay, makes sense.
Sometimes I've used these, just as a quick meal replacement. I've got a 2-year-old son, and when he was first born, things get a little crazy, and sometimes I don't have time to mix up breakfast, and I've been working, it's 10 o'clock, and I want to get some food in before it's too late, and I'll throw one of these together. And I think of it as kind of a safety net for myself to make sure I'm getting some calories and some of the micronutrients that I might otherwise miss out on.
Right. Now, how did you put it in a blender, or did you shake it up in a bottle? How do you make them?
I typically make them in a bottle, just shake them up like a protein shake. I've found, in my opinion, Soylent is, to my tastes, the best tasting and has the best mouthfeel. It tastes, their plain version tastes, I think the best way to describe it is like cereal milk. Like if you had a bowl of Cheerios, the leftover milk from that is what that tastes like. A little sweet,
okay.
A little thicker, like a protein shake might be. The Huel, if anyone's had like a psyllium fiber supplement, Huel, I think, use it. Maybe it's psyllium that they actually use, but it has that kind of texture of you can feel the fiber, the pieces that they use for fiber in the drink. So for me, it's got a less desirable mouthfeel, and it takes a little longer to shake it up in a shaker. But that high protein version is pretty attractive to me. Yeah,
it would be. I'm sorry if I missed it. The Soylent, is that soy-based protein then, or what's the protein source?
So the Soylent nutrition, hold on here. I did pull up all the nutrition facts to have them handy.
I always wonder about the protein source and the fat source.
So Soylent uses soy protein isolate. The fat source is going to be your canola or sunflower oils for Soylent. Okay. So it's not the most desirable if you're going to have it every day of the week, I don't think.
Yeah, I like canola as a good monounsaturated. It's almost like olive oil light in a way, as far as, being mostly monos. But, yeah.
And then for the Huel, and I know I've kind of ignored the Kachava because that one I do not have as much. I have not tried it, and it's quite a bit more expensive as well. It's like $4 or $5 a serving. And their serving size is only 240 calories. So to me, it's not a true meal replacement. It's more of a pricey snack.
Right.
But then for Huel, they use pea protein, flaxseed, brown rice protein, sunflower oil, cocoa powder, tapioca flour, and then it moves into the natural flavors, et cetera. Some of the ingredients that aren't as high of concentration.
Yeah, I usually like to see some kind of a monounsaturated heavy fat in the mix if I can, because the omega-6 heavy stuff with lots of linoleic acid, like the corn oil, some of that kind of stuff, I don't know. I feel like people already get so much of it. But at the same time, I bet these taste pretty good. Like you mentioned, mouthfeel. They have a fair amount of fat in them. They probably taste pretty good.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I find them pretty satiating when I've had them. It doesn't fill me up for as long as a solid meal will, which I suppose makes sense. But I can eat them for a meal and feel like I've eaten a meal. I feel full. I'm satisfied. Like you said, they taste good. They scratch the itch of having something that's a little fatty, a little sweet. I like them. I continue to buy them to have around and use. I maybe have a meal a week that I use one of these where I'm just in a rush and just throw them together.
That's a decent amount of fiber as well. I mean, 6 to 8 grams, kind of pushing toward that roughly 30 grams, that like World Health Organization might push. The WHO has a little bit higher recommendations, and sometimes it's per 1,000 calories. I get it, but that's a good way to get some fiber too, because I've fussed in the past about looking at freshman diet records over the years and how almost all of them eat more saturated fat than monounsaturated, right? Which is part of the healthy, like Mediterranean diet, and all that. And also the fiber that, man, some of these guys have like single digit fiber intake. And I'm like, oh my God. So I like things that help rebalance our terrible Western diet, right? So get some omega-3 or monounsaturated fat, get some fiber. I almost don't even care what kind. I mean, some of the fermentable fibers are something that I look for, like inulin and that kind of stuff. But, psyllium's a good choice for fiber in general. What about the sugar, Anthony? You said like 40-ish carbs. How much of that is typically sugar in these?
Let's pull that up. Nutritional facts. We've got sugar for the Soylent, so that was 42 carbs, 16 of which are sugar.
Okay.
Yeah. And for the Huel, that was a little less, I suspect, here.
Anything substantially less than half sugar is something that usually appeals to me, because I think about, like, just compared to a bowl of cereal, like you said, like a lot of the kids' cereals are about half of the carbs are sugar. So some sugar I think is going to be important unless you want to jump into the, alternative sweeteners and all that kind of stuff. And not a lot of people want to do that necessarily.
Right. I was just going to suggest or offer the high protein Huel. That version is 25 carb, 5 of which are sugar.
Okay. Yeah, not bad. Not bad at all. The micronutrients. Yeah, I can see people looking for, I don't know, maybe 15 or more. Like you said, like depending on how many a day, 20% makes sense. You're working toward 100% of the daily value and the different vitamins and minerals. Probably underconsume potassium and calcium and magnesium and zinc. And what about polyphenols and phytochemicals and that kind of stuff? You kind of alluded to that earlier. Do you see that in these, or because to me that's kind of the stuff that's part of complete nutrition that's gotten less attention over the years,
Right. So Soylent doesn't get into that. So Soylent, to me, that is really like the epitome of it. If you were to take something and try to recreate what a human needs to eat in a lab, they just dose what do you need, and they dose the ingredients at exactly 20% across the board.
Yeah, macros and micros. Yeah.
Exactly. Huel gets a little farther into those phytonutrients, and they try to use, you can see they're using more, I can't really say, I guess, complete foods, right? They're using whole rice ground up or whole pea. And so they do have a little blurb about the phytonutrients in there. And I'm focusing on the black edition, that high protein version, just because that's what's most relevant to me. And I think, assuming we have a lot of carryover from the Iron Radio group, probably is more interested in the higher protein. So focusing on that one, they did add specifically lutein, lycopene, oh boy, you'll have to help me, green tea catechins, and zeaxanthin have been specifically added on top of whatever is found in the pea and rice and flax that's in there. Mm-hmm. So they at least have taken some steps there. They also do put probiotics in there, Bacillus coagulans, and then they also do include a little bit of kombucha. So there's some bits of the yeast and whatnot that were in there, it looks like. Huel does a good job of being pretty holistic for a meal replacement product.
Right. And like you said, a lot of people, they're not going to be religiously consuming 5 a day unless they're on some kind of all liquid diet, which I typically wouldn't recommend unless you have to. Some HCP is telling you to do that. But it does make sense that, people would have to consider this as part of their regular diet, like you were saying. Like I might drink one of these as just to focus on the protein. You might as well throw in some general food stuff. I would suggest that listeners just think about what you're being presented by the Western diet, and then try to find things that are going to help replace those inadequacies. That's why I asked about some of the phytochemicals and that kind of stuff, because Yeah, people don't eat many fruits and vegetables. They don't get enough fiber. We eat a lousy fat blend, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, one of the definitions of complete nutrition is to have X number, and I think it's probably company specific, X number of the micros, vitamins and minerals at least a good source. So we think about good source, according to the feds, is 10% or more of the daily value. Excellent source is typically 20% or more of the daily value. Let's say a vitamin C or a calcium or whatever. Some things are going to be harder to cram in there than others. And when you talk about 40 grams of protein, I feel like in a serving, we're probably up against some kind of laws of physics. I'm not a product formulator, but you know what I mean? Like, otherwise it's going to become pudding. Right. So, no, that's interesting. So you use them, so I'm assuming you'd recommend people at least look into it.
I would. I think it's a little pricey if you buy, to buy a whole bag, I guess each bag is either 15 to 30-ish servings. So they run between $2 and $3 a serving, let's say. So if you look at it compared to protein powder, it's, at least twice as expensive, or about twice as expensive. But if you consider it a meal, right. I'm going to spend $2 in ingredients to make a meal at home that's not going to cover me for all the micronutrients. Now you're losing out on a lot when you drink your meal, but it's not too bad for the price.
I could see why you go for the one with 40 protein, because like you, and I think even if people aren't fitness enthusiasts who listen to Nutrition Radio, people tend to underconsume protein as far as what some of the research suggests. Mm-hmm. Like if you want to max out protein synthesis, you need 20 to 40 grams at a pop, depending on your age. Let's say maybe 4 times a day, whatever. I know that's a lot. That's higher than the RDA, but I think people are really coming around to understand the importance of protein. We've talked about that a little bit.
Last takeaway as well, and some of these products, for anyone who's done camping and used freeze-dried meals, at least Huel does offer a meal version of their product. So they have 10 or so different meals, pasta dishes, mac and cheese, like a yellow curry, and a few other meals that offer the same nutritional profile, but in a little bit more of a meal format. Still just as easy. You just pour hot water in and wait 5 or 10 minutes.
Right.
I wouldn't rank them anywhere near something that I or my wife make at home, but it's a little closer to feeling like you're eating a proper meal.
That might have been where I've seen it, because my wife and I are kind of looking at RVing, like retire early, live on a shoestring budget. And I've seen some of that kind of stuff because it's lightweight. You could take it with you. You can be in the middle of nowhere. And so long as you have water, is it that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. It's that's what I would use it for. Next time I do a backpacking or a camping, camper RV trip or something like that, I'm putting a bag of this in because, in my opinion, a lot more cost effective than some of those meals you can buy. If you buy the freeze dried meals from your REI or whatever, right, $10 a meal, and this works out to about $3 or $4 a meal for these ones. So it's
interesting,
not too bad.
Out of just full disclosure, I have worked for companies that do nutritionally complete kinds of drinks. So I'm trying to leave this to Anthony to give his thoughts. I'm not going to, other than offer some definitions like what's good and excellent source, of a nutrient and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's an interesting topic. I think as technology moves forward, it's just going to be hard to ignore that kind of thing, especially when they're throwing in the probiotics and some phytochemicals and all that kind of stuff. That's very interesting because that's really, in my mind, going above and beyond the complete nutrition to, like you said, not just the textbook Institute of Medicine, here's the RDA for X number of vitamins and minerals, but what is complete nutrition? Because I do think that's almost I don't think there's a government definition like there is good or excellent source. So it's kind of up to the company what they want to put in there. So it's good to have those kind of brand examples so people can shop around. I appreciate that.
And, I've thought about this after we've recorded the past couple of weeks, that all of my products and topics that I've talked about are all dairy based, right? Which is great. Dairy protein is awesome. But for anybody who doesn't like to eat meat or animal products, all these brands are all vegan from what I can tell, and all of their products. So, think of that as a positive or a negative, whatever you will, but I know that opens it up to folks that might not be able to have dairy. So that's nice for some folks.
Yeah, I often notice that when people say high quality protein, I think about, because there are some definitions for that. Like you would want something with a high PDCAS or DIAS value, right? Protein quality value, and dairy is at the top of that list. But yeah, if there's multiple sources, other two you mentioned, I think I might gravitate toward the Huel, not just because of a little dab of probiotics or the phytochemicals or whatever, but just I like to see a mix of plant proteins, and typically a higher dose as well, because even though they can be a high quality, like, soy's up there pretty high on the PDCAS scale, at least. On the DIAS scale, it's not as good, and I won't get into reasons why, but it's still pretty good. So, yeah, and especially when you're saying if that's not your only nutrient intake, I think I've always liked the idea of dietary supplements in this way, right? Like as technology moves forward and we have the ability to do this, I almost think like NASA, like astronauts and stuff, like what do they put in that stuff? Because that's what you need,
Right. And if you're interested, the Huel website does give the amino acid profile of their protein blend. After it's all put together, they have quantified the amino acid profile for their product. So you can always go and look at that for those that are into the more chewy details.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Breaking nutrition science.
Okay. Out of interest in time, let's move on to your nutrition science topic. So calorie restriction has been around for, decades, of course. And I've heard a lot of things about people trying to, look at that for longevity, a lot of animal research, because in people it's really hard. I've at least heard or recall that the restriction has to be really high, like 30% less calories than you normally eat, which would be enough to make a lot of people miserable. But what's going on in the breaking science here?
So this paper was just published October 13th in the Aging Cell Journal. It's actually not been published in their actual journal yet. It's just available for their online section, so it's pretty new. The title is Calorie Restriction Modulates the Transcription of Genes Related to Stress Response and Longevity in Human Muscle. So a chewy topic here. This is part of a larger study called, it's an abbreviation or acronym called the Calorie study, which was a big cohort of researchers got together and got a large number of people to eat at a calorie restriction for 2 years. So it's a pretty long study with a pretty large number of folks. And then they had a lot of researchers and a lot of funding, so they came in and did a bunch of sub-studies under this. So they got this big cohort, and then they were able to use the data and do different testing. And so this particular cohort was a group of, I think, 90 or so individuals that agreed to have muscle biopsies in their one of their quad muscles. Mm-hmm. And so they had a baseline, a 12-month, and a 24-month muscle biopsy. Well, they had a calorie restriction group and an ad libitum or eating normally group that they followed. And so these were people of, I think the average BMI was just over 25. So technically in the overweight BMI category, but really on the midline right there. Mm-hmm. Probably lighter than average, I guess, right, in the States. And they followed these people. So they saw an average of 12% calorie restriction. So they instructed the calorie restriction group to eat at a 25% reduction. In reality, they averaged about a 12%. Okay. And at 12%, they were able to observe the genes that are associated, or I shouldn't say the genes, many of the genes that are associated with things like circadian rhythm, DNA repair, your mitochondrial health, so the health of your energy powerhouses within the cell, to overuse the term that's always used when we talk about mitochondria, and some genes related to proteostasis, which I would assume is just the ability of your body to regulate the proteins that are being used. Mm-hmm. And they saw those genes, both the expression or the usage of those genes trending towards, I'll say improvements, because this is a case where sometimes up is not always good, down is not always bad.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes the genes were turned on more or turned on less, or different expressions of the same genes, we'll just say. we're seeing that we're associated with longevity, preservation of your health, we'll just say, and improved stress response. So that's just with a 12% calorie reduction that they saw this. So I thought that was pretty cool. This cohort of people, they did experience muscle mass reduction. They had overall weight loss in the first 12 months of an average of, I think it worked out to about 20 pounds on average.
Wow.
And then from year 1 to year 2, their weight stayed stable. So they did have a loss of muscle mass. In this cohort of 90 people, they didn't have a loss in muscle strength, so they measured muscle strength. That said, the overall calorie study, I did a little further digging, did show a loss in muscle strength too for the large cohort. So I kind of wanted to point that out because the article that I read that led me to this research paper, the reporter made sure to point out, there was no loss in muscle strength, blah, blah, blah. Well, sure, in this small study, but they even mentioned in this paper here that the larger group did experience muscle strength loss.
Yeah. Don't get me started on science journalists, right? Because they filter exactly. It. Yeah.
Picking and choosing. So I did have a couple pull quotes here that maybe would be worth capturing. So the big method that they used here to see the gene expression was they did RNA sequencing. So looking at the message going right from your DNA gets unzipped, transcribed into mRNA, and then I always have to remind myself.
I know, and then translated,
right? And then translated. So that mRNA is the messenger that takes the genetic message out of the nucleus of your cell and into the ribosome, where you can create the proteins that then cause the effects that you see. And so they were measuring those messenger RNA bits and seeing not just the quantity, but also then the difference in how some of the genes were expressed differently. So the couple that stuck out to me, I wanted to just highlight some of the areas that they were looking at here. So they were looking at heat shock response, mitochondrial biogenesis, so creation of mitochondria, DNA repair genes, autophagy, so being able to clear out the unused or dead cells and products of the cells, some signaling pathways, inflammation-related genes, and then a lot of genes that are related to your circadian rhythm as well. And in all the ones that they tested, I'm looking at the graph here, they had responses, well, all but one, they had responses that were associated with, I'll say, improvements. I know that I'm overgeneralizing here, right. But improvements for longevity, but how your body handles stress was improved, etc.
Yeah, those biomarkers of aging. When I hear people talk about reversed aging, and I hear that with some of these NAD boosters these days, and I always cringe. But yeah, I mean, I hear the term inflammaging a lot lately, and as I'm getting increasingly old, as my goatee turns white, I'm thinking, I'm glad all these years I focused on anti-inflammatory stuff, my fish oils and curcumin and even vitamin D and, a lot of that kind of stuff. So it makes sense that they would do that. A couple of thoughts. I'm not surprised that their weight stabilized, right? I mean, human metabolism is dynamic. And that's one of the reasons I've always cringed a little bit, even in healthcare settings. If I see someone, I see like a dietitian and he or she is doing like a Harris Benedict or a Mifflin St. George, some equation, regression equation to get somebody's resting metabolic calorie needs, right? Metabolic rate and therefore calorie needs. But that doesn't take into account a bunch of things that are prone to change depending on your situation, thyroid status and calorie intake and like in this case. But because your calorie burning will drop, right? And you and I know this, but I think it's worth pointing out to listeners that your metabolic rate will slow down. I once wrote an article called The Restriction Contradiction, right? Because you think if you restrict, you'll just linearly drop weight, and you just don't. You'll drop weight for a while. And to your point, yes, it's fat, but it's also some muscle. And I don't think people they just think, oh, I'll just lose a bunch of fat. It's like, well, partly. So in this kind of situation, I'd be doing like what you do with protein, which is we've known since probably Gail Butterfield or even before, back in the, let's say, the 80s. Calorie restriction means protein needs go up. Mm-hmm. So in this kind of an environment, I'd be saying, hey, can I have more protein? Because I want to spare the muscle mass. And that's not just to look muscular or be some athlete. As people age, like after age 40, you lose like 8% of your fat-free mass or whatever, muscle tissue mostly. Yikes. So I would want to try to maintain it. But anyway, so you had, were there other quotes there?
Yeah, just to catch some of those. So on the inflammation side, our study highlighted the downregulation of several inflammation-related pathways, including cytokine receptor interaction, inflammatory response, expression of IL-1R1, whose transcript is involved in many cytokine-induced immune and inflammatory pathways. So those were the specific areas that they were looking at. I know that doesn't get into all the individual genes, but to give a little more detail on the inflammation side. On the stress pathways in response to DNA damage, they showed that calorie restriction modulated that. So some of the DNA repair pathways that help fix DNA after oxidative damage, or get rid of the products of the cells when they go wrong. They also saw an overexpressed gene, TINF2, which is a capping protein that protects the telomeres, or so the kind of the buffer zone on either end of your genes that shorten as you age.
Right on.
So it helps protect those. They upregulated a small ubiquitin-like modifier pathway, important in refolding or clearing damaged proteins. Mm-hmm. They looked at maintenance of metabolic homeostasis through the FOXO pathway there, and then I won't get into all the circadian genes. It's just going to be a alphabet soup of all the different genes for that one. But the circadian rhythms there, and then lastly, calorie restriction improves mitochondrial function and biogenesis, leading to the attenuation of age-related declines in mitochondrial function and skeletal muscle. Our study confirms this. So they had already seen that, and they cited 5 different studies that had already observed this. And their study kind of confirmed that they saw the same results as previous studies there. So that's good to, just confirm existing studies. Science is looking at itself and validating itself. So that's good.
I think some of that detail, like, mentioned like alphabet soup, is one of the things that I guess as a systemic physiologist my whole life, I'm interested in what's the rubber hits the road outcome. Because a lot of times I'll hear biochemists say, acutely, these things go up or down. And this is not just acute. I do actually call this more of a chronic. 2 years is a long time. Mm-hmm. But these things point to a possible phenotypical change. But I'm more interested in, like you said, like how much weight did they lose? Or I'm still waiting for that longitudinal study, almost like the Framingham heart study, where one researcher hands it down to the next generation. Can you get people to actually live longer? And the reason they use nematodes all the time and all these short-lived animals is because they can watch them live longer, But I'd love to see that rubber hits the road, because a lot of these pathways, it's all good. That all sounds, like you said, up, down, but I don't know. It's almost like the acute protein synthesis data. You're like, oh, you eat these proteins and look how much nitrogen they retained, or look how anabolic they were. But then over time, the numbers don't always add up. So a lot of times when I was at that NASA conference earlier this year, I saw some of that. Like, look at all these fancy explanations, all these biochemical pathways and proteins, getting expressed. Okay, but did some homeostatic mechanism over the long haul mean that didn't matter much? Was something else going down and countering it? And, so, but this is interesting stuff. I hadn't heard much about the calorie restriction for a long time. But it is in line with what I've seen, that people, they can manage some restriction comfortably, but getting, pretty dramatic drops. Like you said, they shot for 25%, right? That's pretty severe, man. I don't know.
So I think you'll be pleased to hear this individual paper, while it focused on trying to find the mechanisms for, the longevity, et cetera, all that, it was built on some other studies that had shown observed these changes in longevity, whether that's in humans, nematodes, whatever. But the calorie study that this individual study was part of looks like, they've got dozens and dozens of papers. I haven't looked through them all, but they might have some in there that might interest you. You can go to, it's Calorie, but it's spelt different because, the abbreviation is not, they couldn't find an O in the middle. So it's CALERIE.duke.edu. And that's got the whole host of all the papers that have been published. It's got the background for the different phases of this. And I see a note in there about applying for 2024 funds. So I assume that they are continuing this trial on. So maybe there will be something in the future that actually looks at effects in humans down the road.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to make anybody think that I don't believe this would add up to something. Those sound like good things. Practical application, you start to think about how we can do this when the food industry is more. How do we get people to eat more faster and then go have another meal? And I think that's one of the reasons we have such an overweight and obesity problem. But yeah, I don't want to say that I'm doubting it. It's just sometimes it's like that old phrase I heard when I was a doc student. Lonnie, just because it's logical doesn't mean it's physiological. Meaning, rubber hits the road, outcomes down the road. But it probably does if people can stick with this kind of stuff. And that's why calorie restriction mimetics, things like exercise or even different nutrients, like I believe I've heard about like resveratrol and some of these antioxidants having almost this calorie restriction mimicking effect, whereas they can help mitochondrial function. Definitely exercise can cause mitochondrial biogenesis for sure. But yeah, it's a fascinating topic. In fact, ages ago, I wrote a paper called High Stakes. It was a play on words, and it was about if we're overeating all the time, are we doing the opposite? Are we shortening our lifespan just so we can be bigger? It's sort of hard to tease apart because muscle loss and sarcopenia is a natural part of aging, and we should be fighting that with resistance exercise and some extra protein. But there's also some work that even the certain amino acids or the proteins themselves can be problematic with aging, as enhancing or increasing it. Well, you don't want to increase aging, but you need to hold on to your muscle tissue. I would consider body composition definitely one of the biomarkers of aging. So
yeah. Well, maybe there's something to in different phases of your life, taking a different approach. I think Dan John has talked about that in some of his books. But maybe some others have as well, even just with the weightlifting side, focusing on strength and sports when you're young and moving towards bodybuilding style lifting when you're older. Yep. I wonder maybe there's something to that with your eating as well, focusing on reducing inflammation and some calorie restriction in your youngest years and maybe then working towards trying to counteract muscle loss then later in life.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is one of those things where people poo-poo bodybuilders all the time. But, those guys are onto something. They self-experiment, and they're all about muscle mass. And now we understand that muscle mass is about a lot more than, like I said, just, looking swole. So, all right. Now, speaking of which, overeating and the weight management side, you had a weight gain tip or two, I believe.
Weight management tips.
Yeah, so I thought all this talk about weight loss has, makes me feel sick. I want to gain weight at this time of year. It's weight gaining season for me. So longevity be damned. I'm going to gain weight anyway, and so I wanted to highlight a few weight gain tips to go the other direction after we talk about weight loss a couple times. One of them I wanted to stay on topic with what we talked about earlier with those meal replacements, and that is adding, whether it be milk, a protein shake, or one of those meal replacement shakes after you finish a meal is, in my opinion, just about the easiest way to get down an extra 200, 400, 600 calories a day. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing one of those meal replacement shakes or just a protein shake, it's keeping you from going and getting a double cheeseburger to get those calories in, right? It's going to fill you up to where you're full and don't want to eat anything else, but it's a little more responsible maybe than just eating the first fast food that you drive past.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's probably my first go-to when I'm trying to gain weight is just add in something. Don't keep eating my vegetables, keep eating blah blah blah, but add some extra something usually after dinner, so that I don't avoid or push off the next meal just because I'm full.
It makes sense because it's the reverse approach to what we talk about with weight loss, right? With fat loss, which is have something planned before you head out to eat, or before you, God forbid, go to a buffet. Eat an apple, have some protein as you walk out the door. This is like the opposite. Like, do the munching and the chewing and all this stuff that's requires you to be a little more hungry. Then, even when you're done, you can usually slam something, a beverage. Yeah, that's good.
So that's an easy one. Here's one that is kind of in that same vein, but I think it's a cool tip. It's so simple though. Is if you like cereal, don't just put milk in your cereal. This is your opportunity to get some extra calories. So I've done it where I'll mix up a container, a serving of Soylent or whatever meal replacement, and I use that as the milk in my cereal, or even just a protein shake and use that as the milk in your cereal. Or I've heard you talk about back in the day getting powdered milk and making double milk. So make double milk the milk for your cereal and get some extra calories that way.
So long as you're not lactose intolerant, which would be a nightmare. Right. 24 grams of lactose, because you're in a little 8-ounce cup. Mm-hmm. But that's the poor man's weight gainer right there, right? If you're not lactose intolerant.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's an easy way, and I find it pretty enjoyable because you still get to eat something, you still get to crunch on something. You're not just drinking your food, but it's got all the calories of a protein shake or a meal replacement shake.
Yeah, I do that even now. I'm going to be brand agnostic here, but yes, I will take a ready to drink like Tetra Pak kind of product that's mostly just the protein ones. They got 30 or more grams of protein, and have that on my cereal in the evening, right? Instead of 2 cups of just regular skim milk. Dairy proteins help me sleep too. Sometimes I don't know if everybody's like this, I'm just weird, but I can put something like that, dairy proteins on cereal. And if I'm having a hard time getting to sleep because of racing thoughts or whatever, it puts me down. And I don't know if it's some of the peptides in the dairy proteins or what, or just the carbohydrate load and some insulin surge. I don't know. But I think that's a good one. If you don't, especially if you're trying to preserve muscle, and I think muscle is always a concern. If you're trying to make gains, it should be mostly muscle. If you're trying to make losses, you should preserve it as much as you can. So having something with way more than 8 grams of protein in a serving, like cow's milk, or there'd be even less in like oat milk. There might only be 2 grams, or it depends on the brand. So that's a cool idea. Have some of that handy on your cereal.
And then I think people focus on meal prep a lot with weight loss, but I think people should remember that meal prep is even easier when you're trying to gain weight, because all the big, heavy, hearty meals are great for reheating. Casseroles or hot dishes and soups and stews and all those sorts of meal prep meals are so easy to make, and they reheat so much better than chicken breast rice and broccoli does.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage people to don't sleep on meal prep when you're trying to gain weight too. If you plan out that you're supposed to have 6 big meals tomorrow, and you have the meals ready to go and pre-packed, you'll do it just like weight loss. It's the same concept.
Yeah, the reverse, it's worth bringing up. And I like to do this on Nutrition Radio too, right? Because on fitness-oriented podcasts, people are very like-minded. But I think it's true. Just like you would plan a weight loss diet, you have to plan weight gain. It is hard. It's really hard to gain lean mass. You're never going to gain 100% lean mass, of course. But so point well taken. So meal prep is going to be very, very handy as far as making sure you meet those calorie goals. When I was in San Diego, I was a master's student. I did a behavior management class, and everybody was trying to, change one of their behaviors. So some people would say, I want to stop biting my nails. Some people would say, I want to, I don't know, whatever it might be, stop drinking so much pop. Well, mine was to consistently eat 4,500 calories a day. And I don't want to bore people here too much, but that was hard. It was really hard. multiple servings of, my usual foods, and I don't want to get into it. You've probably heard a lot of this stuff, but it's really hard to do that. And if you don't plan for it and you don't kind of contingency management, and planning and get stuff to make it as easy as possible, you're not going to do it. I can't tell you, and you've heard on other podcasts, some heavy like lifters and stuff, they get sick of the fun fades, right? And they get sick of overeating. It gets really hard to do that. And you're not going to make a lot of weight gain progress just with protein. You're just not. It's requisite, but it's not the whole picture. So now I know you had one other topic. Let's table this to next week if we can, because that's going to be a whole discussion in itself, I think. So you mentioned stew, and that caught my eye because, like you said, it's fall, it's weight gain time. I start thinking Guinness meat pies.
Well, you'll like this recipe then.
Okay. All right. What do you got?
Rant, product review, or recipe.
So this is my mom's beef stew recipe. So all I've done is just add an extra pound of beef to her usual recipe and made it my own. So really quickly, everyone knows it's easy to find a recipe for stew. So I just like to use about 3 or 4 pounds of beef, chuck roast. But I use up I don't really care for round steak or the different cuts of round. So I'll chop those up and throw them in. Whatever lean, high protein meat you can throw in there is great. A few cups of beef broth, usually about 3, salt and pepper. You brown up your beef, add the beef broth, and then either simmer it or throw it in a slow cooker. Or I like to do an Instant Pot just because it gets done a little faster. Mm-hmm. Then usually I put in about 2 potatoes cut up into bite-sized pieces. I chop up 1 onion, add a bay leaf, let that cook until the potatoes are almost tender. And then I mix up a couple tablespoons of flour and a half cup of cold beef broth to as a thickener, and I pour that in. Oh, and I like to do that now rather than once everything is fully cooked, because usually if I cook this, I'm making a real thick, hearty stew. And if you start stirring up the veggies, the meat, the potatoes, and it's real tender already, it's going to come apart into pieces. So I try to thicken before everything's fully cooked.
Oh, good tip. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm lazy, so I just take a bunch of frozen mixed veggies, carrots, green beans, peas, corn. You get them for dirt cheap. And I just put a couple cups in there until I think that it looks like it's enough vegetables to, keep my mom happy that I'm getting my veggies right.
Right. Health it up. That's
exactly.
That's what I do as well. Peas and carrots, I'll nuke on the side a little bit, just soften them slightly, and throw them in just to health it up.
Exactly. And then I season at the end. Again, quick and dirty tip here is just to whatever your local butcher has as an all-purpose seasoning, or Lowry's if you can get that. It's good enough for beef stew, right? It's kind of got the meaty paprika, salt, garlic kind of onion flavor in there. It's good enough for stew. If you're, I think, Lonnie, you mentioned you like your Guinness. So if you like your Guinness, now's the time to put just a little bit of Guinness in there to get that flavor. You can enjoy your beef stew now, have a couple servings, let it cool down, and then sure, you could put the leftovers in as is, but I like right now to take and make myself a meat pie. So you've not only made beef stew, but you've also now made a filling for a meat pie.
Yes, you have.
And so I will take I don't really make pie crust myself. I haven't ventured into that realm yet. So I just buy the pre-made pie crusts, throw them in a pie tin, par bake the first one, following whatever the directions on the container are. Throw my stew in, maybe I'll thicken it a little more if it looks like it's a little bit of a runnier stew, so I'll throw some extra flour in to thicken it. Mm-hmm. Throw in a little extra Guinness or something to give it that kind of, malty, yeasty flavor, and then throw the top layer of pie crust on and bake it up. And now you're not going to get sick of stew, because you're not going to have stew for 10 meals straight. You're going to have stew for a few meals, and then you're going to have a meat pie.
And you've really jacked calories, too.
Exactly.
In food science class, I had a professor, and the best compliment he could give, he was very hardline, and he'd walk by, and I would be beaming, because he'd look at my stuff like he would say, we're working on pie crust, and it had to be he's like, it's got to be layers of flour and lard, and he's like, acceptable product. Lonnie has an acceptable product. And I was beaming, because he would almost never say that. Now you might think that's not much of an accolade. No, man, that's a gold star, But
But the point is, I remember talking about like different fats. If you're looking for flavor, lard is the way to go. But yeah, those pie crusts add so many calories. Anybody who can't gain weight, I don't buy it. Meat pies are the way to go. Some of the highest calorie foods I can imagine are pies. Pecan pie, are you kidding? But this way you get the protein, you get some vegetables, like you said. There's some excuses there that it's a little bit balanced. I have been playing with bone broth instead of just regular broth, just to try to get a little bit of, hopefully some, I don't know, collagen peptides, something like that, like poor man's collagen, because my joints are shot for genetic and age reasons. With similar results, some have much better flavors than others. Because I can't really top what Anthony's saying. This is a great recipe for gain. Probably my single favorite of all time. But if you don't like the bone broth, try the different brands, because some taste way better than others. But obviously, when you look on the back, there's going to be a certain gram of protein value that you're not going to see in the regular broth. So next week I'll have to report back. Yeah, my wife knows the good brands as far as flavor and the stuff that tastes closer to the actual beef broth, because otherwise they might taste a little funny, and I don't want my meat pies fooled around with.
Yeah, and if you're on the go, you can always, instead of making one big pie tin, make little hand pies, and your crust to filling ratio, and therefore the calories that you're eating with all the fat in there, will go way up, and it transports real easy. You can just munch them cold if you want to.
We just said you got a plan for weight gain too, right?
That's right.
And now you're stacking in more fatty, delicious crust. Right on. Now, the truth is, it might be good to have some of those set aside or even in the freezer, and then brown it up. If they're little things, you should be able to brown it up pretty well without too much fuss. Because I think if you let a meat pie sit too long, I don't know how long I would let it sit. I mean, you're pretty much going to eat them within a week anyway, but the crust can get a little soggy on you.
It gets a little soggy.
Yeah.
Throw it under the broiler for a minute if you need to, or put it in the oven for a couple minutes.
That's right.
That'll do it. Or you can do a combo, microwave for a minute or two just to get it heated through, and then broil or oven for just a minute or two just to get that crust going again.
Yeah, everybody, Anthony speaks the truth. This is the way to size. If you're trying to actually put on muscle, or even if you have family members, like I'm always pushing protein on my mom. She knows I'm such a protein pusher. I'm trying to sneak it into everything because she's, mid-80s and shrinking. She's shrinking. So I want to make sure I push this kind of stuff on her. So it's a good, fairly balanced kind of meal because of the veggies and all the protein and the calories. I love it. Okay, well, we are about out of time, so that's another good episode. You have a lot of good stuff. I guess.
Thanks. Hopefully I'll still have enough for next week as well.
Yeah. I wanted to save that one because.
Yeah, that'll be a good topic.
We got one more week, right? Okay. All right, good stuff. Thanks again, Anthony, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you.
The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.